Welcome to On the Record, a new music business podcast from Billboard and Sickbird Productions. I'm your host, Kristin Robinson. I'm a senior correspondent here at Billboard, and each week on the show, I will be giving you a peek into the conversations that I'm having with executives, artists, and reporters all day, every day as part of my job here at Billboard. On today's show, I am very fortunate to be joined by Billboard's senior Latin editor, Griselda Flores, to talk through the impact that Trump administration policies have had on Latin musicians, fans, and concerts. You might have heard about the recent news that Bad Bunny is not planning to come to the US on his next tour due to fears about potential ICE raids at his shows. But that's just one of many stories that we'll talk about here today. As another example, Griselda is joining us remotely from her hometown of Chicago, where just months ago, the local Michelada Festival, which featured big acts like Grupo Firme and Anita on its billing, were canceled due to uncertainty around artist visas in a, quote, rapidly changing political climate. All of this has had a sizable impact, both culturally and economically, on the Latin music business. And as Trump's second term progresses, it shows no signs of slowing down. So let's go ahead and bring in the true expert on this topic. She's been reporting on it all year. Please welcome to the show, Griselda Flores. Griselda Flores, thank you so much for coming to On the Record. We're so happy that you're here.
Thank you so much, Kristin. Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to talk to you so badly. As soon as I thought that I was going to do a podcast, I immediately thought I need to talk to Griselda about the reporting that she's doing. I think it's one of the most important topics in the music business this year. And I wanted to start by asking you when it really came on your radar that this was really starting to impact the Latin music industry.
Yeah, I would say that I started paying attention to it even back in November when President Trump got elected, just because he had campaigned on an aggressive crackdown on immigration. And historically, even with previous administrations, when that happens, when there's a stepped up immigration enforcement initiative by any administration, historically, we do see a trend where there is less people willing to go out. Maybe they're fearful of immigration raids. And so this has happened in the past with previous administration. Actually, my boss, Leila Cobo, she reported on it when it happened with George W. Bush back in 2007. Yeah, back in 2007. So we see that happening with previous administrations. So I thought, maybe just keep an eye out and see how this could pan out for Latin music when Trump does enter into his second term. So in November, it was more of me like paying attention, keeping an eye out. I didn't really know what to expect, what would happen, if there would even be an impact, right? And then in January, I would say like 1 or 2 weeks after he took office, we started hearing rumors. A few shows had been canceled or people weren't buying tickets. My boss was also hearing it from her sources, and that's when my reporting started.
I feel like oftentimes when people cancel shows, they're usually not very transparent about why. So
Right.
Were they publicly just saying, hey, we have to cancel the show because I'm sick, or like some other kind of BS excuse? And really underneath the hood, you were hearing that the reasons were actually related to the new administration?
I would say both. This was happening in very small markets, right? In Northern California. And these were shows at nightclubs. Shows in venues that maybe were like 500 to 1,000 people capacity. These were small shows. This wasn't like an arena show or a stadium show, nothing of that sort. And this was in Hispanic neighborhoods, Northern California. I spoke to a promoter who worked that market. He did say, as soon as he took office, and that's when, we were seeing immigration rates, very sporadic immigration rates across the country. And immediately he noticed that, people either weren't buying tickets to the show, and he just sort of had to cancel and offer refunds. And it was sort of like people understood what was happening, right? Again, because we see this happening, it's a historical thing that always sort of tracks when administrations step up their immigration enforcement. But there was this other promoter in Florida that canceled the show, obviously not in Miami, but a smaller city in Florida. And they posted on their social media saying, because of, the political climate and what we're seeing, we're postponing these shows. So some were very transparent about why they were canceling or postponing the shows. Others, it was sort of just, more like under the radar. But again, people weren't reporting on it, media wasn't reporting just because they are very small markets.
I'm kind of surprised that the Florida market was transparent about it, because I feel like there's probably also a lot of fear associated with being transparent.
And I thought, that's very brave of them to even acknowledge that that's the reason. But, low concert attendance just tracked in general with what we were seeing in other areas. So, for example, the New York Times was reporting that people weren't even going to church. They weren't going to doctor's appointments. People were scared to drive their kids to school just in case anything could happen. So if they weren't going to doctor's appointments, they weren't going to shows either, right? Because this was a real thing that was impacting their lives. And it just made sense that was happening. I will say, after I started reporting it and I published the story on just sort of like what the impact could be, visa issues weren't a thing yet, right? My first focus was, are people going to concerts, right? Are they too scared to buy a ticket to attend? That was pretty much my focus at the time.
When you're focusing on that, were you also thinking about most people buying tickets for shows that are far in the future? So these people were having to think about whether or not they wanted to show up for a show, sometimes like 6 months away. Was that part of the reporting at all?
No, I think it was very immediate of like the shows happening that weekend. People were still buying for shows in the future, maybe in like bigger arenas, bigger artists that they were willing to go see. And I will say, after reporting and my story came out, things got back to normal. Like, people started feeling more comfortable about going out. My reaction was like, okay, maybe people were scared that first month that he went into office, but now everything seems to be back to normal.
When was that? When did you feel like it kind of settled out?
Late February, early March.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that promoters were saying like, we kind of went through like this whole few weeks of people weren't buying tickets, but now everything seems back to normal. It was just like that initiative of like being scared to go out.
Can you explain, for those who don't really know much about visas, like, what are the kind of visas that artists typically get, and how long does it typically take to get approved for one?
So the type of visas that artists apply for and are generally reserved for these types of artists that we cover are O1 and P1B visas. And these are non-immigrant visas. So this isn't like a green card. This is a working permit that is temporary. And for an artist to get it, they have to have a petitioner. So a petitioner has to apply on their behalf. And this petitioner is typically, could be the artist's label, could be the promoter, could be, the manager that is applying on their behalf. And they would have to show an itinerary, right? An agenda for this artist. This is why they need to be here. They have to be in the studio. There's a songwriting camp that they have to come to. They have a 20-date tour. And that's proof of why they need to have that work permit, why they need to be in the U.S. for a certain amount of time. And these work permits or visas, they will be approved for 2 to 3 years, maybe. But again, it just depends on how busy they're going to be. Like, it has to make sense of, we give you a year and they have like a, 2-month tour type of thing. So what determines is just how busy they'll be here in the U.S. But again, these are temporary. Once they do expire, they have to reapply and they have to go through the whole process. And the process has just generally always been complicated. It costs a lot. And not everyone gets approved. That's always also been the case.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was rare that people wouldn't get approved. It was, people could get their visas revoked for a number of reasons, like criminal activity, you overstayed your visa, a whole bunch of other issues. But it's not as common, right, as what we're seeing today. Everything is just so public of what artists are going through with their visas.
I'm also wondering if we could go back to Trump's first term. Did you see the same wave of fear and difficulty with selling concert tickets? Or is this really something that got exacerbated during the second term?
Definitely the second term, we've seen it more. The first term, I remember that mainly it was because of that travel ban that he imposed for Middle Eastern countries very early on in his administration. We were seeing artists mainly from that area being affected. And a lot of the immigration lawyers that I've spoke to say the same thing, right? We were dealing with clients from the Middle East just because of that travel ban. So from what I remember, I don't recall having to report on Latin artists having their visas revoked. I think the process was taking longer than it usually was, just because when that happens, there's more extreme vetting, which is also what we're seeing now. So I think in his first term, it was more of like the Middle Eastern countries that were being impacted and artists from that area. And again, just like the whole process taking longer than expected.
What was the first moment or event where you noticed that visas were really starting to play a role in the story you've been developing?
The first case that we heard of with the visa situation, I would say was very early April. And it was this regional Mexican group called Los Alegres del Barranco. They had a show in Guadalajara in Mexico, and they sing narcocorridos. So a narcocorrido is a type of music, a style, a subgenre of música mexicana that is very controversial because the lyrics often glorify narco culture or cartel leaders. Even some states in Mexico have banned artists from performing narcocorridos in public spaces.
Oh.
If they perform, they have to pay a fine, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've seen consequences happen in Mexico. There weren't really consequences that we knew of here in the States, right? That was never an issue. At least nothing that we knew of.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that. So this group performed in Guadalajara in Mexico, and they sang a narcocorrido. They even displayed images of a cartel leader during their show.
Okay.
So,
yeah that's tough.
That is tough. It's hard to go unnoticed. So when that happened, we have to remember that in January, when Trump took office, he designated cartels as foreign terrorist organizations.
Oh, okay. And that's the first time they'd ever been classified as that.
Uh-huh. So these guys are singing about cartels. So when that happened with that group in Mexico, mind you, they were performing in Mexico, not the U.S. So the State Department's Deputy Secretary, Christopher Landau, he took to Twitter or X. He wrote a post saying that the U.S. Government had revoked this group's working and tourist visas. And this was really alarming, again, because they were performing in Mexico, not in the U.S. Then we go into the whole thing of like freedom of expression, the freedom of speech. Where does that play into that?
Not that glorifying cartels is a good thing,
right.
But it does kind of feel like a free speech thing, maybe.
Totally.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So when you heard about that, did someone text you that tweet, or were you just already following that so closely that it was already on your radar? Like, how are you getting some of this information and these tips?
So thankfully, we have 2 reporters in Mexico who are great, and they're very aware of what's happening. And they've actually covered a bunch on narcocorridos getting banned in Mexico. So they've been following that story. They're great at what they do. So one of them saw it, and she wrote it up for us. But I think that was really the first case that I think put a lot of people in alert, right? Someone was getting punished for singing, right? Because they didn't like what they were singing.
It almost feels like the Mexican equivalent of like gang rap. Would that be like a fair comparison?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is something that I still today don't know, but it's like, who is alerting them? Who is alerting the federal government that this is happening? Like, who told them that this artist was playing a show in Guadalajara? And then how are they getting the list of all these other artists, right, that we're not now seeing? Because Los Alegres were the first case, but now they're not the only ones. After that, we saw a handful of artists who not necessarily sing just corridos, but they have sung narco corridos in the past. That's really like a story that I'm trying to figure out, like, who's alerting them that these are the artists? Is it a collaboration between both governments? We just don't know that part.
Who's probably the largest narco corridos act today?
some of the biggest artists have performed narcocorridos. You have Los Tigres del Norte, which are huge. We have huge artists that have performed narcocorridos just because it is part of, sadly, it is part of our music. It's part of our culture. And people want artists to sing narcocorridos. I think people, that is a part of, what Mexican music is.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit more about your background. Your family is from Mexico, but you were born in the U.S., correct?
I'm in Chicago now. I was born and raised in Chicago to Mexican parents. And my household was, we were the quintessential Mexican immigrant family, trying to hold on to our roots, our culture. Regional Mexican music was always blasting in our house. I didn't listen to anything but regional Mexican music. So this is something that, I love. I love that I was there to report on just how it grew globally these past few years, and now to be covering this.
It feels like one of the later waves of Latin music to finally hit the U.S. So I imagine like growing up, the friends of yours who were not Mexican American, they might not have understood any of the music that you were listening to at the time.
Oh, no. I will say, though, that Mexican music has had a really strong foundation and a huge fan base in the US and in Mexico. It's one of those, it's been around forever. And we now have artists who are Mexican American, artists who are Mexican. But it wasn't always like the most popular genre in Latin music. It was very much, for a specific type of person, only Mexicans listen to it. Even in, within my own family, there's people who don't like the music just because it's very specific. The instruments are also very like specific. There's a specific sound to it. It's not as global as probably other sounds like reggaeton that could be a bit more like just rhythmic. It was a little genre that, I loved, and people would look at me weird just because I liked it. It was like, ew, you like that music? But now everyone loves it, and I get to be and hear and report about it.
Yeah. I mean, now I'm sure everyone was going to you about Peso Pluma and being like,
yes,
okay, it's actually really cool.
This has been my life forever. Yeah. Welcome to my world.
So, I mean, obviously, first of all, like Latin America is not a monolith, but Latin music is also not a monolith. So are there certain genres and subgenres and even nationalities within Latin America that are being or that are having a harder time at this point due to ICE and due to visa issues?
With Mexico, it is sort of more of the regional Mexican artists who are going through a difficult time. Either their visas are getting revoked, or again, it's just a process that used to be 6 months, now is 12 months, just because of the extreme vetting. So that's sort of like what Mexican artists are going through. And then the other artists that I recently reported on are the Cuban artists, touching, lightly on Venezuela, just because both of those countries, Cuba and Venezuela, are part of the travel ban that was imposed by President Trump in June. So it just really limits and restricts people who can come from both of those countries. And I was speaking to someone who works very closely with Cuban artists, and it's just sort of, I think he was saying even like 90% of those applications that are, being 90% of the applications from Cuban artists are just going straight to like administrative review, just because it's a multi-agency process that is reviewing them, and they're just going straight to admin review because of that travel ban. And admin review is sort of like a black hole. So that artist is just in limbo. And he's saying it's hard for Cuban artists to get booked at festivals or shows because you don't know if they're ever going to get approved, how long it's going to take.
Due to the visa issues, the delays, even visas being revoked, has that had an effect on Latin artists being able to be booked for these major festivals and tours in the future? Like, is there now some fear among venues?
There was this person that I spoke to from an association of Promotores Unidos that focus mainly on regional Mexican artists, saying, we have to think twice now because fans are like, do we buy a ticket not knowing if the artist actually can get a visa to come to come to the US. Some were saying like the fan will wait literally till they see a video of the artist saying like, I'm in the US. They have proof that the artist has entered. That's when they're willing to buy a ticket. And it's like a day before. So that is definitely impacting pre-sale for a lot of these venues and the promoters. But Kristin, Coachella, they just announced their lineup. There's no regional Mexican artists on that lineup.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, Karol G is a headliner, but that's about, I remember seeing that there was like a genre breakdown. I don't know if you've seen this. I'll send it to you after this.
Okay.
So there's a company called Roster, shout out Roster. They create this thing every year where they change out the names of the artists with what genre they are, so people can track like how many artists from pop are booked this year versus hip hop versus Latin. And I'm pretty sure Latin had a pretty weak showing this year compared to years past, besides the Karol G of it all.
Yeah.
Same, hip hop was down really far. But yeah, talk to me about that, like with Coachella and in the bookings.
Yeah. And I had been reporting a bunch, maybe like 2 years ago, of like, oh my God, look at all these regional Mexican artists on the lineup, making strides. And this year, there's no regional Mexican artists on that lineup. And, you know, I get it. I think it's hard for people to want to book someone who's coming in from another country because of the visa issues that we're having. But that's not an excuse, because there's a bunch of Mexican American artists who live in the US that they could have booked. So that's a whole other story.
Do you have any knowledge of whether or not this is about the visa issue, or if it's just like a general shift in the Coachella booking more towards pop this year than other genres?
I don't have confirmation. I just, found it very strange that there were no regional Mexican artists on the lineup.
Yeah, it's just interesting timing. For sure.
Right, yeah. And I think it's important to know that, while some big artists from Mexico, maybe they're having visa issues, but it's no excuse as to like exclude the genre completely just because there are so many regional Mexican artists who are from here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk about another festival, the Michelada Festival, which is in your hometown of Chicago.
Yeah.
That got canceled this summer. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happened there?
Well, Los Alegres del Barranco, who were the first ones to go through this publicly, were part of that festival. They were on the lineup. But I think Michelada Fest, when that happened, they were able to just sort of bring in another artist. And that was sort of like the fix then when that happened. But then I think it was in May that they officially announced that they were canceling the entire event. And they were saying it was, due to uncertainty surrounding artist visas. And then I jumped on the phone with one of the founders, and he was saying that at the end, first, they heard about Los Alegres and they thought, okay, maybe that's just an isolated event.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It's like, it's Narco Corridos. Maybe the other artists are fine.
Yeah. They're making a case out of them, right? But they did have other regional Mexican artists who were on their lineup. And at least one of them, we know for sure publicly that they also got their visa revoked.
Wow.
So he said, internally, we were hearing about all these artists who were getting their visas revoked. Do we give people just sort of like a, last minute lineup? Or do we make sure that we're being super transparent with them and say, like, we'd rather cancel this year and come back stronger if possible next year? So they ended up canceling because they were dealing with that internally, where it wasn't just Los Alegres del Barranco, but a whole bunch of other artists were also dealing with the same thing.
What are the financial implications for a major venue or a major festival like Michelada when they cancel like this? Like, do they have to give everyone their money back? Is there insurance for something like this?
Obviously, we know that there's force majeure with insurance that covers whenever, a show gets canceled because of something. I think it like hurricanes or something like that.
Yeah, it's like an act of God.
Yeah,
this would be like an act of Trump. So a force
right.
Trump.
We need that in there in the fine print.
Yeah.
But visa issues are not in there, so it's not covered, right?
Wow.
So it's up to, it's a total loss at that point because insurance doesn't cover. But it was really sad for Michelada Fest because this is a festival that went from being like a street festival, a very local Chicago festival, and it had just grown a lot. I mean, you had Caliuchis who had headlined it last year. So it was just really like in a growing moment. It was growing, and for it to happen to them this time around, it's an independent company like from Chicago. It impacted local vendors that they hire, merch that they were hiring, security. He was saying, this is a big contract for a lot of the people that we hire, security. I mean, we were their biggest contract of the year, and now they don't have that gig anymore.
Wow. I mean, it's crazy how if you watch the domino effect, it's not just the artist taking the hit. It's not just the fans being inconvenienced. There's the venue and all the vendors, as you were saying. Like, this is a really random aside, but I once took so I went to USC and I did their music industry program, and they had a class called music festivals, and we had to like plan out hypothetical music festivals and think about all the logistics. And one of the big things that we focused on in that class was, how many porta potties do you need? Like all of these like random things that no one would think about. How much fencing do you need? How much security? Do you want to ramp up security due to gun violence potential? It is really fascinating how many minute details go into something like that and how many contractors there are involved in it.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
I mean,
even the porta potty thing was something that he thought about too. Like, we're that company that we hired, we were their biggest event of the year, and how they don't have that gig anymore. Like, it impacts not just the artists, but so many agencies around it, so many people.
Yeah. And so do you think that there's good odds that they're able to come back next year after this financial loss?
I hope so. I'm rooting for them again because this is a Chicago, very hyper local people who are working the event. The founders are from Chicago. And again, it had just grown so much. So I think the community will rally together and hopefully we'll see them come back.
There have been some other high profile instances of visas being revoked. The one that I always come back to, because I think you've written about it a couple times now, and it's been very interesting to watch. Julian Alvarez. Can you talk to me about that situation and what happened there?
Los Alegres del Barranco were a little bit lesser known. Julian Alvarez is a huge Mexican artist. At one point, he was the box office king here in the U.S.
What a title. Yeah. I love
right. He's an interesting case, I will say, because in 2017 or 2018, he was having some issues with the U.S. government, with the U.S. Treasury. So he couldn't come work to the U.S. His visa was revoked. He couldn't come here legally because of those issues with the Treasury.
Wait, so what were the issues? Do you know?
Money laundering, something of that sort. So he wasn't allowed to come into the U.S. or work in the U.S. This was at the peak of his career when they had just called him the box office king. So it definitely derailed like his career here in the States. And this was before regional Mexican music was even like a global thing, right? So he had just announced his comeback tour because those issues had been cleared. He was able to come back to the U.S. He got a visa. His visa was approved. He was ready to go. Like, this was one of the most highly anticipated tours in Música Mexicana. I mean, the box office king was coming back, right? As soon as he announced a few shows, they sold out. He did 3 sold out SoFi stadiums in April.
Wow.
That's how big he is. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's very shocking to folks that are not following the space very much. That is way bigger than, I mean, so many other artists. Like, I don't know how to be articulate about it, but that is huge.
It was a huge deal.
So he got to do those shows at SoFi in Los Angeles? Okay.
And that was in April. He got to do those shows. So he got his visa approved.
Yeah.
He got to do those shows. He went to LA. After those shows, he went back to Mexico. And I think this was perhaps maybe a mistake. He went back to Mexico after those shows, and he tried to come back in May for his show in Texas, the AT&T Stadium. He had a show that Saturday, and he was traveling on Friday So just the day before, he decided to travel to Texas. And at the airport, they informed him that he couldn't travel because his visa was revoked. Super last minute, obviously a day before this massive show. And I think it really just left his team sort of in shock and scrambling to try to figure out what was going on. I was lucky enough to speak to the promoter, Henry Cardenas, who's actually based here in Chicago, and he's the CEO and founder of one of the biggest indie Latin promoters. And he was very honest about the whole situation, just saying like, even in his 40-year career, 40 plus, he had never seen anything like that where a visa was just revoked so last minute, a day before a show.
So he got no warning. It's not like he got a phone call or one of his lawyers heard that there was some trouble.
No.
I find that so fascinating. And I mean, yeah, you'd think he would have more of a heads up. But
yeah,
I mean, from there, I guess he has to cancel everything. And then
he had to cancel everything. Well, I think he said that it was postponed until like further notice. But I spoke to Henry and he was saying it was a total loss. Like we lost $2 million that day, like for that show, because, you know, you have labor and production. Everything was a loss.
Wow.
And he's like, we can't keep losing $2 million every weekend. Like, this is insane. Like, we need to do something about it.
Were there a lot more dates on the tour after AT&T?
No, that was the last one that I'm not sure if it was 2 shows or 1 show, but he was about to announce a tour. Like, a tour was coming. And again, this was supposed to be part of like his comeback tour. So that all just sort of got derailed. And even to this day, like he hasn't been able to come back. We don't know if he's going to tour or not. But that's, you know, the promoter that I spoke to, he was saying these guys, Julian Alvarez makes $10 million in a show in the US. You don't make that amount of money in Mexico or in any other Latin American country. Like this is big. Like artists are losing a bunch of money.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is crazy. I mean, so are the monetary opportunities generally for Latin artists larger in the US if you can break into that market?
Totally.
Okay.
I mean, you know this. The US is still the #1 global market. This is where, you know, you get the money, the streams are, which I leave that to you because I know you more. Yes. You know more about that.
I will actually explain this if anyone's listening and is not aware of this. So I mean, the cost of having a Spotify subscription, for example, is different based on where you live, because obviously something that costs a fair amount to a US person might be totally different for someone in India or someone in Poland or wherever. The buying power of consumers informs the price that Spotify will list their subscriptions at, or any streaming service. It's not just Spotify. And so the corresponding royalty pool for artists in that country are dependent on how much users are paying for the service. So in a place like the US, you can certainly earn a lot more streaming dollars than if a stream came from the Philippines. Or another country where it might be a lower cost price point. So yeah, that would be true for probably most of Latin America.
To be a global artist, you have to come to the US and establish yourself as an artist here. You want to meet with the DSPs in person. You know, you want to do promo out here with media outlets. This is where the biggest awards happen, our awards, the Latin Grammys, right? You want to make sure that you have a presence here in the US because, again, this is the #1 market for music in live or in streams, right? So this is detrimental to an artist's career.
Mm-hmm. And this is going to sound like a really dumb question. I actually don't know the answer to it. Is the Latin music industry primarily based in Miami, or is there a base outside of the US that is more of the primary location?
Before, it used to be LA because of its proximity to Mexico. And Mexico is probably the biggest market in Latin America. Brazil as well. But yeah, I think it was LA for Latin music. Now it's probably Miami, between LA and Miami.
So basically, if you are not able to come to the US, it's not just like, oh, I can't do this one tour that I wish I could do. It's also probably songwriting sessions and getting in the room with your label executives and your managers and the folks that can really propel your career forward.
Yeah, that should still be like an important part of a release plan coming to the US and having that presence.
Interesting. So, like, have you heard about stuff like that, like songwriting camps being affected by artists that are either afraid to travel or are not allowed to? What have you been hearing in that space, if anything?
Yeah, I think it's impacting just the entire business of what Latin music is, right? I think our focus always goes to the artist and what that looks like for them, but it's impacting, I'm sure, their labels, right? Promoters, venues here, will they try to be more flexible and be able to change dates here and there? Songwriting camps, I'm sure, have also been impacted. For one of the stories that I just did, I spoke to an executive at an indie promoter who was saying, like, one of their marquee artists, he, lost a tour when he's their biggest source of income. And when their artist loses their biggest source of income, which is a tour in the US, like, he literally feared that the company would go down. Like, would they have to shut down operations, downsize as a team? He was scared of losing his job. So this is impacting like all areas of the business.
Mm-hmm. I think it's easy to forget that there are a lot of independent labels and other sorts of companies within the music industry that are kind of relying and banking on their one breakout.
Yeah.
And it like funds everything else.
Yeah.
I hear this all the time. And I mean, it's a very dangerous position to be in as an independent company, to not have a second or third star, to just be relying on one. But obviously everyone would love to have more stars. So it's no one's fault. I'm sure they're trying to break more all the time. But
I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely an issue. I'm wondering, throughout all of this reporting, it sounds like you've spoken to so many different people at so many different angles, but were people afraid to talk to you at any point?
Some were really open to speaking to me, like that promoter he's been around for many years. He's a veteran, and he's, he was very nice enough to speak to me on the record. He was the one that, saw the issues the first month that Trump went into office and had to cancel some shows in Northern California. So he was very nice about it just because he's been around for many years. He's dealt with this in the past. That was one example of a conversation that I had. Others, were also honest in saying, we haven't felt an impact yet. Maybe it's too early, too soon to tell what sort of, what we can expect will happen. And I get that. Just because I was calling them up in January and they were like, he just took office. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, so true.
And, there were others who were very scared that I was doing this type of reporting. At least 2 people asked me not to write this story.
Oh, wow. Wait, so why did they not want it to get out? Because I mean, you're the one taking the risk putting it under your name, but like, wouldn't they want people to understand the issues that the Latin music industry is facing?
I mean, it's such a sensitive topic, right? You're talking about a very vulnerable community when you're talking about undocumented immigrants, and I get that, right? I have always been very careful about that type of reporting. I went to school and I studied social justice journalism. So I get that. But I think maybe for them, they were just scared that we would expose something so negative about what was happening within Latin music, right? People losing money. I don't think people want that to come out, that they're losing money in any sort of, capacity.
It is so rare to find a source who's willing to be honest about the fact that they have taken a big financial hit, because even if it's out of their control, it obviously doesn't make them look amazing. So it takes a lot of bravery to actually be able to be honest about that.
Exactly. And I recognize that so much from Henry Cardenas, who talked about Julian Alvarez, just because he was so honest about it. And I think he was really like the first big executive to say, like, hey, we need to talk about this because this could jeopardize our entire industry. So it was a lot of very different conversations that I was having, just a lot of back and forth, trying to get sources to feel comfortable with me. Because, I get it. Like, I was just coming in and asking these questions from like out of the blue. So I'm not upset at them because, again, no one wants to talk about this. But Kristin, we're journalists and we have to follow the story. We have to follow the numbers. And this was a thing that was happening.
As your reporting went on, because you've written several stories about this topic, did you feel like people warmed up to you a little bit more because they knew more about what they would expect from your resulting stories?
Maybe the first story that I wrote, which was more, like what could happen under the Trump administration. I think people were just like, oh, like, okay, that was a good story. But I didn't really get any feedback from the industry. My second story, which was the regional Mexican artists going through these visa issues, everyone on, that I follow, that follows me from the industry, was reposting this story. And I think it was the first time that, they saw a story like this where it was out in the open and we couldn't just like slide it under the rug anymore. Like this was impacting our industry in a very real way.
I actually made a reel or like a TikTok about it. And that was a very high performing one for me too. It seemed like that was something, it just felt like it hit the zeitgeist. Like everyone was talking about it. Everyone wanted to see your reporting on it. What was new in your most recent reporting that just came out last week?
If an artist gets their visa revoked, how can that impact their career growth? And that's when I really started writing about the stream effect and how a stream is worth more here, the importance of doing promo out here, and if they don't, that could really derail their career. And I touched on the Cuban artists' issues that they're going through now because of the travel ban that was imposed in June. So that's really kind of like what's new. And again, it's still a lot of reporting. These stories take time. So I know that I always say like, oh, I'm working on this. And I don't release it till like 2 months later.
No, I mean, that's the thing that I think my non-journalist friends just like really don't understand, that you don't just go out with something because you heard a rumor. Like
no.
Maybe that rumor seems very, very true and very possible. You're going to need to dive really deep and get a bunch of sources. And especially with a sensitive topic, there's some people who will never want to go on the record. They'll never want to be associated with the story. And you have to figure out how to handle that. So yeah, 2 months makes a lot of sense. I would understand if it was like 6 months too. It's a big challenge.
And sometimes you have to run with the story without many on the record interviews, but I am having on background interviews off the record because people feel more comfortable that way. So a lot of my stories, you'll see either like, oh, this person, preferred to be anonymous or on background, or maybe there's just like 2 people that I actually name because that's who was willing to speak to me on the record. But in the process, I'm interviewing so many people that at the end I'm like, I think I've, spoken to way too many people at this point.
I think going back to the visa issues, visas being revoked specifically, the examples that you've given so far are people who have had issues with, well, I mean, you have one narco corridos example, which although that might be a free speech issue, it's like glorifying cartels is maybe not the most palatable thing. And then you have Julian Alvarez, who had some issues with the Treasury Department previously. Are there any examples of artists that are getting their visas revoked and there is absolutely no rhyme or reason behind it?
Yeah, I mean, Grupo Firme is another group that we know for sure went through this in a very public way because they had to cancel a show at a festival performance in June. And this group, they've been on the cover of Billboard.
Wait, didn't you write that?
I wrote that one.
Shout out.
I know, I'm like, they're huge, right? They were selling out stadiums in the US. And they're not really like a narco corrido type of band, right? They've performed 1 or 2, but their work is mainly romantic songs, party songs. And then, we heard that their visa had been revoked. And I think that's the scary part, right? Are they just seeing a regional Mexican artist and assuming that they're singing narco corridos when they're not? Like, that is not who they are. And that's one that really sort of like shook me, where it's like, are we just assuming because they sing regional Mexican that they're talking about cartels? And I think that's where it gets really scary, where it just doesn't, wipe out a whole genre or derail a whole movement that we've been seeing because they're just assuming that, oh, you're regional Mexican, you won't get a visa.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, very, very recently, moving outside of regional Mexican, Bad Bunny, Puerto Rican born Bad Bunny, one of the biggest stars in the world, has said that he does not want to tour the US because of what was it? Was it ICE or
because ICE could show up at his concert.
Wow. And are there any examples that you've heard of ICE actually showing up, or is there more of just a chilling effect by the fact that it could happen?
We've never heard reports of ICE showing up to a show, a concert. I think it's just like that, fear of, what if it does happen, right? Again, we haven't heard of that actually happening. And when Bad Bunny said that publicly, I mean, he's probably the biggest Latin artist today. He's global. We were talking about it before, like he doesn't need to tour the US at this point because he's such a big artist. But for him to say that publicly and acknowledge that as a real fear, I think it's going to open the doors for many other artists who were thinking this, just weren't, didn't want to say it out loud. I'm sure they've been dealing with it privately within their own teams and have been talking about it. But Bad Bunny actually saying it, I think it's going to now really start conversations. And there's no way to hide it anymore. When Bad Bunny is saying, I'm scared ICE could show up to one of my shows, like you can't hide it anymore. Like this is a reality.
Like, why did he feel brave enough to say that?
He's Puerto Rican born, which means he's a U.S. citizen. So I think that was probably something that made him feel like have that courage to really say it. Whereas other artists maybe don't feel comfortable just because they're not from the U.S. They don't want to get into that type of politics. That doesn't mean they haven't spoken about like being in solidarity with the immigrant community. I think we've seen that from a bunch of Latin artists. But I think that really, encouraged Bad Bunny to speak up, using, privilege in the correct way of, being able to speak up and say that something that is impacting an entire community, his fan base.
What about more localized neighborhood music events? I think you've written about Bailes in the past. Do you mind talking a little bit more about that?
So like the local scene, I would say is even in a more vulnerable position. I think Michelada Fest is like a really clear example of that. Just, even wondering like, could they come back next year just because they're an indie company? So the local scene here, I mean, we even had in Chicago Cinco de Mayo parade being canceled because of it. The festivities surrounding Mexican Independence Day definitely look different here. Just because local politicians are even encouraging people to be more careful of just sort of like the events that we're having, larger gatherings. I think that's still very much a concern of immigration, ICE raids happening or immigration officials showing up. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely scarier when you're a local event where you don't have that, backup of a major company. You don't know if you could survive something like this. Even Henry Cardenas from CMN, he said, if we were a smaller business and we just lost $2 million, that's it. Like, we probably couldn't recover from anything like that.
Did you ever fear getting into this reporting?
This is our job. We have to tell the story, especially if it's impacting a business as big as Latin music. So I knew that I had to do it. Scared just because it involves such a vulnerable community that you don't want to expose. You don't want to make them even more a center of a conversation ever, right? Because of what they're going through, because of that fear that they're going to. I have to be really careful about the type of questions that I ask, right? Presenting the right information, not causing more fear than there already is. Because
you don't want to fear monger and make it
right.
worse. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a real concern. And I was talking to our editors, Dan, I was calling him a bunch, our news director, my boss. I even went back to some of my professors who are media ethics, and I, was asking them, like, am I doing the right thing? Can you guide me? Just because it's so sensitive. And again, I was getting that pushback from the industry initially. So I just wanted to make sure that I was doing it the right way.
That's wonderful to be able to lean on some of like these people who've been part of your past and taught you how to be a journalist in the first place and being able to go back to them.
Yeah.
I mean, on a lighter topic, what else are you working on these days? I mean, beyond, I'm sure this takes up a lot of your time, but obviously, like we were saying before, you did the cover on Grupo Firme and you've done a lot of our covers on Latin stars. So are you doing anything on the artist side that you're excited about right now?
I've focused a lot on regional Mexican artists. Actually, most of the covers that I've done have featured regional Mexican artists, which is exciting. Right now, we're really focused on our biggest event of the year, which is Latin Music Week. That's happening, in Miami in October. And it's such a huge event because we have, it's a week-long event in Miami. We have panels, workshops. Our Billboard Latin Music Awards take place. So it's just sort of like a, community coming together, our industry coming together. And it really is like the biggest, at least it feels to us like the biggest Latin event.
Griselda, thank you so much for joining us. But before you go, I do want to ask you the questions that I ask everyone who comes on the record. This is a segment that I like to call Make Me a Playlist. And we actually do have this playlist on Spotify for anyone who is curious. I will update it every single time that we have an episode come out with everyone's answers, and also the podcast episode. So check that out on the Billboard Spotify. But I want to hear yours. So you have to pick 3 songs for us in 3 different categories. So the first category is a song that you can no longer gatekeep.
It's not an old song, and it's, I think people know about it. But there's this Puerto Rican artist. His name is Tommy Torres, and Bad Bunny produced an EP for him. And I don't think it got the recognition that it should have gotten. I mean, we wrote about it. I interviewed both because it was kind of like the first time that Bad Bunny was producing an entire project.
Yeah, I didn't know that he produced. That's cool.
Yeah. So the EP is called El Playlist de Anoche. It's amazing. It's like alt rock, which is super different for Bad Bunny as well. But there's this one song called Marea. And I think people really need to listen to it. Again, I think the whole project just sort of went under the radar and it didn't get the recognition. But that song is one of my favorites on it.
That's a great pick. What's a favorite throwback for you?
One of my favorite throwbacks is by Ariel Camacho. He's a regional. All of my songs will be Spanish songs, Kristin, because
no, this is good. I need this.
What I report on. Yeah. So this is a regional Mexican artist who passed away, unfortunately, 10 years ago. But he inspired Peso Pluma, all the new generation artists. He inspired. The song is called Te Metiste, and it's a Sierreño, very guitar-driven song that I love to listen to. It's a romantic song, and it's definitely has that Ariel Camacho essence. So I want people to know more about him just because he is a huge icon in música mexicana.
And last but not least, a guilty pleasure.
I guess just listening to the same songs that I always listen to. I should be discovering new artists and trying to listen to, new artists and new songs. But my guilty pleasure is just going back to those artists that soundtracked, my childhood. And a lot of it is from like the 1980s and 1990s. And that's something that makes me feel good. And it takes me back to a place and a moment in my life that I love. So my guilty pleasure is just listening to old songs over and over again, which I shouldn't do.
Well, I love that. Is there any artist in particular that people should check out?
Vicente Fernandez. My dad used to listen to him all the time. And, I think he, for me, takes me back to like my dad, right? And he represents a lot of that of my family. So Vicente Fernandez, huge artist, Mexican music artist.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much, Griselda, for coming by. We really appreciate it. And see you soon.
Thank you, Kristin.
All right, y'all, that was Billboard's senior Latin editor, Griselda Flores. We're very grateful that she was able to join us here today on the Record. And before we sign off, let's check out what's going on the Billboard Hot 100 chart for the week of September 27th. How It's Done by Huntrix falls to number 10. Lose Control by Teddy Swims returns to the top ranks this week at number 9. Justin Bieber's Daisies gains this week, landing at number 8. Love Me Not by Raven Lenae climbs to the 7th spot. Your Idol by Saja Boys falls to 6th. Another Saja Boys hit, Soda Pop, sticks to number 5. Tate McRae and Morgan Wallen's duet, What I Want, rises to 4. And the top 3 songs are still sticking around from last week. So that means Manchild by Sabrina Carpenter stays at number 3. Ordinary by Alex Warren is number 2. And finally, Golden by Huntrix from the K-pop Demon Hunter soundtrack is number 1 again this week for a 6th week. Thanks so much for tuning in to On the Record. Again, I'm your host, Kristin Robinson, and if you enjoyed today's show, please follow, like, subscribe, rate, all those good things. They really help a new show like ours to reach new fans. And we also have an Instagram, at Billboard On the Record, if you want to stay up to date on all things on the record. That's all I have for you today, so tune in next week. We have a very special interview coming up with a top major label CEO. See you then.